Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, October 26th, 2025, and today we're going to be talking about the 2028 presidential election. As Governor Gavin Newsom of the state of California and former Vice President Kamala Harris, also of the state of California, both in the past 2 days have hinted that they might run for president again in the 2028 election. Kamala Harris recently told in an interview to the BBC that she may run for president again, saying, quote, "I am not done," and that she will continue to serve in the way that she feels fit for the upcoming election and generally as a life in the post-vice presidency. Governor Gavin Newsom also said in an interview that he will actively consider whether or not he is running for president after the 2026 midterms. It seems as if both of these two potential contenders for 2028 seem to be up in the air as to whether or not they might run, but actively are hinting towards the idea. Kamala Harris, who was directly asked, "Will you run again?" Her response, "I'm not done." Gavin Newsom asked directly, "Will you run?" He says, "I'll have to consider it." It's the same exact trend line that we saw for former Vice President Joe Biden in 2017, that we saw for Secretary Hillary Clinton in 2013. These are the ways that candidates oftentimes talk about running for office ahead of time, knowing that it might be too early or premature to announce already that they intend to run. And the reason why it is so notable that both of these two contenders are actively considering that they might run in 2028 is largely because right now they are the two very clear frontrunners across the board here. Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom are the only two Democrats that are polling in the double digits across the country. Vice President Harris at 24.6%, Governor Newsom at 21%, everyone else below 10 points. You have Pete Buttigieg and AOC and Josh Shapiro, Tim Walz, JB Pritzker, names that are starting to ring a bell and become household names amongst those, interested in who might be running for president of the United States. But to be quite frank, Gavin Newsom and Kamala Harris have significantly higher name ID than almost anybody else who's on a potential contender list for the 28 cycle. And thinking about, Vice President Harris wanting to run again, Governor Newsom wanting to run in 2028 could mean a lot because they stand out to be roughly 50% of where the primary electorate right now is considered. And they're not the only two that have been seemingly considering that they want to run. Of those who have expressed interest publicly, you have Andy Beshear, Pete Buttigieg, Josh Green, Ro Khanna, Stephen Smith, and you also have a long list of those who are speculated by the media: Amy Klobuchar, Ruben Gallego, who also recently told the press that he has not made a decision as to whether or not he is going to run for president. I mean, we are really in a day and age that could be similar to that of the 2020 cycle, where everybody wants to run for president and everybody does, in fact, run for president. But there are clearly two frontrunners. In the time of 2020, even in 2017, we were making videos about how it was going to be Biden or Bernie. I was saying it was going to be Biden. I felt like that was the very obvious choice. In fact, not to bring that up, but in June or July of 2017, there's a video on my channel of it being Biden and Harris across the board for the 2020 election. And that wasn't because this is a telepathic or whatever it is, or that I have the foresight to see what's happening. No, it is simply because it felt like it was the obvious answer at the time. And in 2028, it seems as if that the obvious answer right now is that the top two contenders, fast forward 2 years from now, will still be Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom if they both want to run. And that's why it is noteworthy, right? All of these candidates, I think, in their own ways, could do better or worse than each other. I think when it comes down to who is the most electable, we'll have to wait and see on that front because, of course, we don't have any mainstream polls. We don't have any real concrete data about what matters as much for the 28 election, since we haven't even gotten through the 25 election, but that hasn't stopped the media from speculating and candidates from engaging. I mean, there's no real other way. If Newsom and Harris seriously are going to run in 2028, their answers right now are adequate, right? This is what you say because this is how you're considering. Even if they're not going to run, which I doubt that, Gavin Newsom's not considering a bid for president on Kamala Harris's side. I don't think she's made up her mind, very honestly. But when we're looking at the 28 cycle and breaking it down in the way that all of these potential contenders are engaging with it, it is all the same. And now we're starting to see it really heat up. It was child's play right after Donald Trump was inaugurated, but now we are starting to see what's happening. Kamala Harris is endorsing Proposition 50 and endorsing, candidates across the country. Gavin Newsom is traveling to red states and blue states, trying to make the case for himself as someone who's outgoing as governor. That's not the sign of someone who doesn't want to seek higher office. He's not running for re-election in California. He's not raising money for no reason. He's not investing himself and causing it and prompting Proposition 50 for no reason. There is a means to an end here on the Democratic side for him, And it seems as if it is very much this primary that right now he's in a very close second place, extremely close to being in first place. And just a few weeks ago was in first place, looking at those numbers at the end of September. So the 2028 election, while seemingly far away, we can look back at those 2020 trend lines and say, wait a second, this election was actually far more predictable than we think. And that's what's really fascinating about it all. 2016 is the same way. When you look at the nomination process and the Democratic presidential primary, when we look at the data, I want us to really unpack it, because the polling data was so important and so predicting of what would eventually happen. I'm not sure if we are going to go ahead and find it here, but let's take a look at the national polling data for the 2020 election. Well, in October and December 2018, Joe Biden led across the board. Who was in second place? Bernie Sanders. Prior to that, in 2017, who was leading? If not Biden, then Bernie. All of 2018, except for one poll from the beginning of 2018, Biden. It was across the board and constant. It wasn't until, we reached closer to the election that we saw that it was Bernie who sometimes, and this is heavy on the sometimes because it didn't really happen much, but only sometimes did Bernie start to pull away from Biden. We saw that Bernie led for a period of time in February of 2020. Biden seemed like he was going to be trailing off. And then what happened? South Carolina saved him. Super Tuesday propelled him, and he won the nomination within just about a month. And so thinking about what was predicting that, it always seems too early until it isn't. And maybe we are getting a glimpse into the future with the articles like these and the data that we see. Regardless of how you feel about Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris, the fact remains, out of a list of 20 candidates, them two pull away 50% of the Democratic Party's electorate. And here's the thing. The 2024 election was obviously not great for the Democratic Party, but there is no telling of what 2028 will bring. If Donald Trump and J.D. Vance are as unpopular as they are today, no, they probably won't win that election. But you can never underestimate Donald Trump's ability at rebounding the way the American public sees him in exceptionally short periods of time. He was more unpopular at the end of 2022 when he announced his bid for re-election than he was on Election Day, by a mile. 20% of the nation, a net 20%, disapproved of Donald Trump in November of 2022. He announced November 14th, 2022. But by the time he reached Election Day, his approval rating was only in the negative by single digits. And by Inauguration Day, was up nationwide by 12 points. Donald Trump knows how to play this game, and so does J.D. Vance. So Democrats cannot rely on a 2028 cycle looking similar to that of 2020. Because even in 2020, Donald Trump at the beginning of 2020 was down 15 points. And yet somehow amidst the pandemic, economic collapse, the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, a real racial reckoning across the country, and engagement with this, at the time, administration, his approval rating on Election Day in 2020 was only negative 8%. You can pull up the numbers. That is fact. And Donald Trump was only able to do that because he has a unique ability at changing the minds of voters in a very short period of time. He did it in 2016, capitalized on the James Comey letter and that final stretch of the campaign where the Access Hollywood tapes felt like a distant and far removed past. And then you look at what he did in 2020, nearly won that election, only lost it by 44,000 votes, 20,000 right in Wisconsin, 11,000 in Georgia, 12,000 in Arizona. And you think about why why in that cycle it was so close, because Donald Trump was able to bring it back. And then in 2024, he did. But if it happens that Donald Trump can't do it in 2028, sure. You could find that it could pretty much just be an open race where any Democrat who wins the election, just like 2008, where I do think adamantly, right? Let's say people make the case Kamala Harris is running again. If you look at the 2004 numbers, John Kerry lost. But I can guarantee you this, if he was the Democratic nominee in 2008, he would have won. He would have won that election against John McCain. It wasn't just Obama who was going to win. Hillary Clinton could have won that race. Anyone could have won that race on the Democratic side because the numbers were so bad on the Republican ticket. Now, would John Kerry have won by as much as Obama? Hell no, right? Certainly not. But it doesn't mean he wouldn't have won. And so it really is a question of, okay, what does 2028 look like? Who is going to be the nominee? Who is going to be perceived as most electable? And does electability matter more than policy matters? I think the 2020 election very much felt like for a lot of Democrats that they were guaranteed to win. So it was a question of how further to the left can they get the mainstream party to go? Can they get Bernie up there? Can they get Tulsi Gabbard? Can they get Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren? I have a plan for that, right? All of these different things that where in the minds of a lot of voters, electability is what got Joe Biden across that finish line, because a lot of voters, particularly older black voters, in specific in the South, that saved Joe Biden's candidacy, were voting on electability because they knew that Joe Biden could beat Donald Trump. And given how narrow that election was, I am actually not convinced in retrospect that any Democrat could have won. I think the narrative at the time felt like that was the case because every Democrat was leading on the national level. Every single Democrat was beating Donald Trump in a head-to-head. But as we saw on Election Day, it was far closer than people realized. So I think that it is going to be really, now that this primary season is already starting to heat up, I think that what we are going to find is going to come down to a few things. I think electability is going to be the most important against J.D. Vance, but I also think that as we see that the two top contenders right now both come from the state of California, which is already going to be earlier in the primary season and already going to be more substantial in terms of delegate count, as Democratic delegate count is respective to vote share. California, is still going to get a huge portion, the most of any delegation in terms of popular vote and delegate count across the country for the Democratic nomination, and it's going to happen in March rather than in June, which is what was the case in 2016, the case in 2020. California is going to be voting earlier. And the reason why that matters is because it could make all the difference for a California, native candidate, which could benefit Newsom and Harris, who both of them today seem to be actively considering that they might run for president of the United States. So 2028, seemingly, while it very much feels like a far removed future, it is truly something that many of these candidates have been actively thinking about, not even just now, but even in some cases before the 2024 election. There's no doubt that if Kamala Harris had won the election in 2024, that she would have ran for re-election in 2028. There's no doubt in my mind, too, that, Gavin Newsom, who might not have known if Harris was going to win or lose, but was considering that if she did lose, that he would run, as many other candidates very obviously were toying with the idea of it in the eventual reality. Let's say that it was an opportunity or that it was possible. The point is, 2028 is heating up, and we need to pay attention. We've talked a lot about 2025 and 2026, and we will spend most of our time talking about that. But this race is really going to start a lot earlier than I think the 2020 election did, and it's going to be quite interesting. We practically know who's going to run and who the early frontrunners are, and the question is, does that maintain itself? If history is indicative of anything, besides 2008, oftentimes these primaries, on the Democratic side at least, can be predicted a few years out in advance. Now, it's not as clear-cut as it was in 2017, but it's damn near. And I think it'd be very interesting to see if these two top contenders made it back to the national stage in 2028. And chances are they will. So keep your eyes peeled. 2028 is going to be a very fascinating race. And to be quite honest with you, it's already begun today. So we'd benefit from really just, looking at it, understanding it, watching what each of these potential candidates are saying closely, because it can often foretell exactly what they're going to do. And I would say if I was, looking at this from that perspective, I'd argue that I think that we're up for a very contentious, but also very long list of candidates in the 2028 cycle. And it seems right now, Kamala Harris and Gavin Newsom lead that bunch. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video for you to watch, and then a playlist for my 2028 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.